It's unethical to diagnose somebody sooner than 18 months because I don't know what they have. This is going to take a lot of work to figure it out. Somebody that has trauma often doesn't trust people and often doesn't want to go deep because they feel they're going to get hurt again or traumatized again.
There's something that's called global transient amnesia or transient global amnesia that happens on rare occasions when people have a heightened state of stress that hits them all at once. We might even call it like a little traumatic response to cold.
Ketamine is a very important medicine. It's not plant-based as we know, it's synthetic. It's becoming legal in a lot of different states. Ayahuasca is an indigenous blend of two plants that's into a little drink that people consume orally.
I've been in these spaces with Icaros and music and things like that. Can you speak just a little bit about sort of how that setup lands in the Maloka?
So a lot of us, including me, are empaths. And what that means is that I remove myself from a situation when I'm dealing with a client and I pull in their energy and hold it.
This is Willpower.
I have the honor of sitting here with Dr. Jeff McNairy. Welcome to the Willpower Podcast. I'm so thrilled about this conversation.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing in Costa Rica.
Yeah, it's so exciting. We've really opened the lens on speaking about the world of psychedelics and the world about therapeutic healing this year on the show. And you're really one of the first people who's going to be able to launch and lean in with us on the ayahuasca journey space. And so I'm very excited to do that. I want to, just as a teaser for the listeners of what's to come, grandmother medicine, I am going to start by asking you this question though, which is really get an understanding of your hero's journey and the man that you are. Is there a specific instance in your life that presented a big challenge that really informed the work that you're doing now? And could you share that with us?
Absolutely. So one turning point for me in my career and something that happened to me was when I was a postdoc intern. I'm a doctorate level psychologist with a master's in public health. I went to UCLA and I'm from California, Los Angeles, born and raised. And what happened as I was working with a lot of high risk people in drug and alcohol addiction, people with trauma, people with abuse, all kinds of stuff, depression, anxiety, you name it. And what I was trained and taught to do in school was to stabilize those clients. And the stabilization process, I believe the Western medical model does very well because it just gets you out of like a risky sort of behavior set. And the problem with it though, is it doesn't go much further than that. So it just kind of dead ends into a place where the person is stable, but then nothing gets resolved. And that's where symptomology, addressing of the symptoms only, is kind of what ends up happening with meds and with therapy, with a lot of stuff. So I was getting really frustrated that my clients were just kind of hitting this dead end and also were relapsing or continued to be upset, continued to be sad about stuff. And so I was constantly looking for new tools and sort of strategies to help people. When I was managing a rehab in Malibu called Passages, I was the administrative director for about 8 years. That was a really cool place because it was so expensive that they had all kinds of different therapies. They had Chinese medicine, spiritual counseling, body work, more holistic things. And that was the first time I'd ever been exposed to that. So I really, really liked it. And I saw that there was like a bridge between an Eastern philosophy and sort of a holistic realm, but also with some protocols from the science side and therapeutic side. So for me, I was able to kind of start to go down that path to see like what I could learn in that arena. And that's where I came upon different plant medicines. So that was a breakthrough for me that I saw there was other tools available that people could use for their healing.
Yeah, and were you able to witness in some of those cases, like you were witnessing it before you were working in it, where people were trying different plant medicine, substances, and pathogenic medicine and shifting their state for the long haul?
Well, I didn't have a ton of experience in that before, but I was hearing a bit about psilocybin from the Johns Hopkins studies, and I was hearing about MDMA for couples therapy and other things. So I know that a lot of the psychedelics were originally in therapy, but then they got banned for lots of political reasons. I'm sure we could talk about. So I was intrigued and saw there was maybe some hope there. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's so cool. And then there's like it's such an interesting arc, I think, as well. Just my background is, deep in wellness and health optimization, and yours in therapy and understanding how people tick and how to be able to shift their state and get them to a place of, again, not just stabilization, but a place of real long-term healing. And I just wonder how it felt for you too, like the stigma of like drugs or plant medicine, or because you've been around it enough now and long enough to see the arc that it's like, how did that feel sort of in your system to say, like, where was the critical needle moving point where you said, damn, I want to include some of this and find a way to do it with, you know, clinical respect and reverence for the medicine, but also making sure that people are safe and, yeah, branching out in the way that you have, because you're one of the main centers for this work.
Well, when I was at Passages, a client came in and this guy was really difficult. Obviously at rehabs, everybody's kind of difficult, but
Yeah.
this particular guy was extra difficult. His name's Jerry Powell. He's our CEO of Rhythmia now. So,
Wow.
yeah, wild, right? So this guy, he wasn't able to connect with any of our clinicians on site. And they were getting frustrated with him too, because he was aggressive, just angry. So I told the staff, I said, look, I'll work with this guy myself, which I wasn't doing because I was just managing the facility. And I took Jerry on as a client and I worked with him every day for 60 days inpatient. Wow. And then I put him in my private practice for 5 years and he moved to Malibu. He was from Pennsylvania originally. So he moved to Malibu to try to stay sober. Not a great idea, by the way, in Malibu of all places. So for 5 years, I kept using these same protocols that I had learned and been trained in school and a little bit of holistic stuff, but he wasn't breaking through. He kept relapsing. Now, his drug of choice was Demerol, which is an opiate-based surgical medicine. So he had access to that because of his surgery outpatient clinics that he owned. He owned 165 of these places. That's why he was the super successful dude. So he stopped that, but he still was using alcohol, cocaine, other stuff. He was fighting a lot. He got banned from most places in West Los Angeles, like blacklisted, because he was just so disruptive. So he got a note on his DMs from a shaman that we used to refer people to for aftercare at Passages. And I didn't really know what the shaman did so much, just another one of these clinicians that we could send people to help them continue the momentum of sobriety. But she told Jerry that if he went down to Costa Rica and tried this particular medicine, that he would be able to turn a corner, because she had worked with lots of guys just like him. And like high net worth people that are struggling but not happy at all. The world would say you should be happy because you have everything you want, but they're not, you know, as we know. So Jerry went to Costa Rica in 2014 and tried a plant medicine that completely turned him around. And so when he came back to Los Angeles, I didn't really know what he had been doing. I just knew he went on a vacation is what I thought, you know? And he came back like this totally different guy. And I was like, what the heck happened down there in Costa Rica? And he explained it to me. And that's where I became, okay, this is something that could be promising, that could work. Right. And that's where I started on my personal journey as well. In 2014, I went back down with them and I did the plant medicine myself. And so that was like a huge turning point.
And was the protocol that you did down there, was it like a mix of plant medicines? Was it specific to ayahuasca? Like, were they doing things more of the tribal feel to it versus a clinical feel at that point? Because it still is some years ago.
It was a little bit of both. It was a clinical feel because there was a medical doctor that would triage you before going into ceremony, but he was sleeping most of the time, wasn't really present. And the medicine was from a Bwiti culture in the Congo, Gabon area of Africa. And that was a medicine, we've all heard of it, called Iboga. And Iboga, now they use Ibogaine, which is one of the alkaloids from Iboga to help with opiate addiction. It's really cool. That's what the President Trump just signed an executive order to start using that.
Massive,
very
political
massive.
action. Let's just shout out the moment of, like, you know, sometimes I get a little frustrated with bro culture, and also
Yes.
Joe Rogan texts the president and then there's some movement and it's like, I'm sure that the people have been working on this for like 20 years are like, oh, that's what it took, a text from Joe Rogan to Trump. And then, like, let's leave politics aside in some way, but it's really interesting to see the needle move so quickly.
Yeah.
And having some regulation around and some open-mindedness around in the space.
Totally.
And I think we continue to see more and more sort of like specific to that medicine, right? It feels very much like there is a smart move towards addiction recovery, and there is a smart move towards focusing our energy on veterans who have really seen some of the brunt of the worst things in their lives, right? And so that's like really beautiful. And so that's what you went down and partook in?
Yeah, and that's where we opened.
That makes you OG. That makes you pretty OG. You know what I mean?
Totally. The main,
you guys been
the craziest plant medicine to start off with. Yeah, it's like the deepest, most intense medicine. So, that experience is what opened my eyes to other things as I became aware of ayahuasca, of San Pedro, different things that are out there, Kana, different things that are heart openers and lots of stuff. So that was a very important time for us in 2014.
So good. I want to hear about the protocol that you're using specific at Rhythmia and how it became Rhythmia from the initial visits of traveling, you going down there and then you saying, hey, I feel like there's a calling here to do something deeper, especially with your background and your credentials. This is really beautiful because we do see in this world of plant medicine, psychedelics, et cetera, that there can be overuse or people who continue to chase the dragon, I always say, and then not quite doing the work of integration. But before you lean in, I want to lean into the story about you and the founding of Rhythmia and the expansion of it. I think it's important to sort of talk about what you just mentioned, which is knowing that Ibogaine or Iboga, knowing that perhaps even some of the protocols you work with. How does a person who's newer to this landscape understand maybe what the gateway is? Because I do agree if someone is navigating something like we talked about with the vets and PTSD, and there are helpful tools out there that are stronger medicines, but someone who's newer to this or someone who's trying to find their path forward, if they weren't listening to the show, they might be like, oh, I guess I just go do Ibogaine because it's all over the news, right? And it's powerful, or maybe the same ayahuasca, or maybe, whatever the medicine is that they find. How do you feel like someone can actually walk forward and choose and select the correct medicine for them?
Well, I've found that ketamine is a very important medicine. It's not plant-based, as we know, it's synthetic. But I'm a big fan of ketamine because it's becoming legal in a lot of different states. It's legal in California, for example. And that's medically supervised by a clinician that prescribes it to you. So psychiatrists are running it out of their offices. There's nurses present. So that is, I believe, a good entryway into understanding the psychedelic process, because what all the psychedelics have in common, whether it's psilocybin, iboga, ayahuasca, whatever, is that they cause a synaptic plasticity moment in our brain, which just means that we can adjust our response that's emotion-based and historical memories from trauma and things like that, that we can kind of get out of that mindset, that looping, that rumination that we have that's negative. And so ketamine and also MDMA in particular are really good medicines to kind of get somebody to feel confident in the process. And then they can go into deeper processes like ayahuasca, for example, would be that. But, a lot of people that come to Rhythmia have never had any experience with anything, and this is their first time doing any of it. So we've seen good results from people also starting just with ayahuasca.
There's a notion of the safety component. My business with Sherpa, I throw people in a lot of cold water and cold bodies of water and ice baths. Nice. And there's something that's called global transient amnesia or transient global amnesia that happens on rare occasions when people have a heightened state of stress that hits them all at once. We might even call it a little traumatic response to cold. And it's not just cold, it's many things in the world. It could be anything. And the medical community doesn't really know exactly the catalyst or the mechanism of action that makes this thing happen, where people lose for 12, 24, 36 hours all of their short-term memory. And so it's a really interesting phenomenon. But what tends to happen, because in one or two of occasions, master trainers that work for me and whatnot, this thing has come up, because from a safety perspective, we need to ask, certain questions and check in with someone and see if they need to go to the ER or whatever. And again, for anyone who's listening, this is not common. But what's really interesting to me is that what happens more often than not, 8 times out of 10, is the minute that the person who has this transient global amnesia response gets into the ER and sees white lab coats and here's the machines and whatever, their memory starts to come back. And I think quite distinctively that's happening because someone's nervous system and body, this is for many Westerners, right? That is an environment oh, everyone here is safe. These people can help me. I can be okay. I'm going to be fine. And people are always fine out of it as well. But as you can imagine, it's pretty disorienting. So from a safety perspective, when people are showing up and you're creating a container for them at Rhythmia that feels wildly safe, then do you feel like that contributes to some of the ability for them to kind of lean into something that's considered a larger medicine? And also, I want to talk about your protocol. So
definitely, it's important that the safety element is the number one thing that we present to the guests. We're the only medically licensed ayahuasca facility in the world. And so what that means is that I had to work with the government of Costa Rica for about 2 years and teach them basically that this protocol for ayahuasca with mental health issues, whether it's depression, anxiety, trauma, whatever, that it's a viable option for people that can be done in a safe way. Because there are contraindications with ayahuasca in particular that make it a unique plant medicine, whereas a lot of the other plant medicines don't have the contraindications in the same way. So we have a team of doctors, nurses, paramedics, tons of medical people that work here, an urgent care center, on a clinic on site. But we also have all the shamanic team that are facilitating the ayahuasca process. So for me, safety is the number one thing, because somebody that has trauma often doesn't trust people and often doesn't want to go deep because they feel they're going to get hurt again or traumatized again. So the key thing is to let people go deep in their process, but if they can't do that unless they feel safe. So we have a very high ratio of guests to staff. We have 240 staff. We have about 45 people working in the Maloka, which is where we serve ayahuasca at night. And there's a 3-to-1, 4-to-1, 5-to-1 ratio, depending on the night, of guests to staff. So it's very safe for people. And that's a big part of what Jerry and I wanted to present, because the place we did it was at this guy's house, this Bawidi shaman. He was a great shaman, amazing guy, but it was in a really dirty environment that was just not some place that most people would feel comfortable. And the doctor was asleep most of the time, and he just kind of took your blood pressure. One time he took my blood pressure and he says, "You may die." He said, I was like, "What are you talking about, bro?"
I mean, this is like a back in the day stories that are like, I don't mean to like laugh and say so fun, but also isn't it interesting how it was a little bit more loose, let's say.
Totally. I was like, "What are you talking about?"
You need to really be in your own autonomy if you're going to decide to do this.
Yeah, I had a little high blood pressure because I was nervous, and he said, "Oh, and it was just funny." And so we have a lot of doctors here that are controlling for blood pressure and working with people to make sure they feel safe. We prescribe the ayahuasca to people. So we do a clinical intake, and that's where we see how much they need or what to start with. So the research is starting to show that set and setting are just as important as the plant medicine itself for the outcome. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. And then your program, you have a specific number of days that people are doing different sits, different, like in the Maloka, they're having a number of sessions over the course of the time that they're there. Can you talk a little bit just about that? And also, I think it's behooves to be said that traditionally when you go to some kind of ayahuasca ceremony, wherever that is that you might be doing it legally or otherwise, there's an environment, right? It might be like a jungle environment. It might be, like you said, a bit dirtier in the sense of like culturally, this has come from a place of the land, right? And tribal culture. And you may be in a place that's like clean or an Airbnb or whatever it might be. But when people are going through the experience, I have always seen it where it's sort of like either the shaman is choosing, not from any kind of medical intake form, about how much you're actually drinking or whatever the delivery vehicle is. And in some cases, people are sort of asking for what they feel intuitively called to, like small, medium, large cup, etc. And so I just would love for you to talk a little bit about that, because I understand the tribal cultural feel of that and all the things. I also know that a sensitive woman, like my body is quite sensitive to medicine, so a small dose of anything goes very far for me. Mm-hmm. So there's things that I've learned about my body because I have quite a bit of awareness, but this is the catch that I always see at these ceremonies. Because I explained to you in many cases in my life, I've traveled around and done led breath work and put people in cold exposure, not in the medicine, but in the days in between, to be able to co-regulate the group, to reset nervous system tone, to have people feel like they can open up more safely with a parasympathetic rebound that comes after cold exposure. And I've seen it in all different ways, in the ways that people do dosing. And so I wondered if you could speak to that, the cultural norm that was, you choose, I choose, shaman chooses, send you to the moon, or how you guys handle that.
So we have a week-long program. People check in on Saturday or Sunday, and they check out the following Saturday or Sunday. The first night of ayahuasca is Monday night. And so prior to that, they've had a couple different workshops and classes explaining exactly how to work with the medicine and how to set intentions, because we know that intention setting is a huge part of this. Now, sometimes people drink medicine and just kind of hope for the best and see what happens, and that can be really cool too. But we're following a program that we've developed over 10 years and 23,000 guests through our doors that's really fine-tuned. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are all the nights where we serve ayahuasca. And it starts around 5:30 in the evening, ends around 2 in the morning. The last one on Thursday is the Yahe Colombian tradition. and that ends in the morning around 8 a.m. So that's like an all-nighter with the sunrise and stuff. It's beautiful. So, for example, like how you are very sensitive to the medicine, and you know that about yourself, just about anything, probably if you take one Advil, you're probably like, oh,
Totally.
So there's a lot of people that have that sort of similar profile. So we're aware of it on the intake. We manage their dose. We give people each night 3 options to drink ayahuasca. So the first dose, again, let's assume nobody has ever had ayahuasca. So we give them about 1.5 ounces or maybe 1 ounce, which is like a shot glass or a little less. And then they just see how they're feeling. And they lay down and they have a mattress. It's really comfortable. And then about 2 hours into it, we check in. How are you doing? Are you having a vision? Are you having a dream? Are you falling asleep? Like, what's up? And then some people might need a little bit more at that point, and some people don't. Some people just continue on. They're in a good process, healing things. And then the third cup is the last one for the night. It's again 2.5 hours later after the second. And some people drink all 3. Some people drink the first and the third. It just kind of depends. So we help the guests figure out their sweet spot with it during the week. So Monday's a kind of test and see where you're at vibe. Whereas Tuesday, they're more familiar. They can kind of go deeper. And it's like that throughout the week.
Yeah, and then it's metabolism have something to do with it as well. Yeah, it's like how fast they metabolize what they've been drinking.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes people will drink the medicine, and then the nights they don't have any reaction. Then the night's over, they go to their room, and then they hit some. So that happens sometimes too.
What's going on?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it's done in a group environment with everyone who's in the same space. Yeah.
Yes. We find that, it's kind of counterintuitive. We found through our data collection that the larger the group, the higher the success rate, which is kind of weird because I thought, hey, if we have 5 to 10 people doing this, you're going to get a lot of attention. You feel safer, more like tight knit. And those are great too. We've had those ceremonies here, but the data shows that if you have 40 people, 50 people, 60 people, the outcome is better. And the reason we believe is because the energy of the group is very important in this. Some people might have like a loud outburst, like they might cry or yell, and they're always embarrassed about it in the morning. Like, oh my gosh, did I disrupt? It's like, no, not at all. You actually helped people release too. So it's a group process that's really powerful.
Yeah, that it's like a little bit less explicable when it comes to the science of it all. But I've always found in these spaces that sort of one begets another in the sense of like if somebody sort of doesn't feel like they have permission to cry or purge or whatever might be happening and someone else does, then it's like the permission slip for the room. And other things may happen where somebody is, there's a lot of talk in these spaces. I don't know what your belief in on it is, but when someone's really holding back and they're next to someone or there's a family member with them, that there's this like crossover of energy being like one person purging for another or one person crying for another. And like, I think we don't really have the answer of what's going on there. I mean, if you do, tell us. But it's really beautiful to see those things. And I always think, you might find this interesting, but just, I'm sure you see the thing where it's like the first person sort of conducts the orchestra, like ding, ding, ding. And then one person starts and then everything goes. Yes. And that's so beautiful to like witness that sort of the musicality of it moving through the room in the way that it does, metabolism or otherwise energetically. But what I always notice, because most of the ceremony spaces I've worked in were a very typical 2-day ceremony, 2 nights. Yes. And is that the second day after I've co-regulated people in cold water, that there's a really interesting harmonization or connection or co-regulation that happens much more quickly, and that people are very seated in it with each other and less worried about their own shit. Like you said, like a bigger group maybe got actually feeling more safe because you don't stand out as much as a 5-person group where you're like, oh, I was the one who cried all night or whatever.
Exactly.
Like really, it's beautiful to sort of see as nervous systems align in any way, whether they're using, in the medicine. And I'm surprised that there's not many people that have gone into these spaces and brought ice bath coaching, and I do it in a very reverent, ritualistic way when I'm in those spaces. But it's interesting to see how the nervous systems begin to align. So I would imagine over 4 days that those people are sort of building connection with each other and really feeling deeply into who they're working with. So I'm assuming it's like when a week happens, it's everybody shows up together, everybody does the ceremonies together.
Yes, and they get to know each other very well because they're from all over the world. And they bond with each other. And oftentimes people just come by themselves. Yeah. But they do sometimes bring family members or friends. But the common vibe for us is people come alone so they can focus on themselves. And what's interesting, you mentioned cold plunge and cold bath. We have that here at Rhythmia. We have an ice plunge. And then we have a guest speaker that comes about 4 times a year named Giovanni Bartolomeo. And he does an ice plunge during the day with a breathwork process, kind of like almost like a Wim Hof thing. And then the guests love it. And that week sells out every time. So I think what you were mentioning earlier about like the regulation of when you give somebody a cold bath is that there's a fight or flight response that puts them into survival mode. And so any emotions that might be present during a survival moment get pushed into the amygdala. And that's where they get held while you can kind of behaviorally survive. That works for all things, like whether trauma-based. If you see a car accident, you know, that happens. Or if you're being abused as a little kid, like that happens too. You push your emotions away. So then when you access that part of the brain, that's where you can let these emotions out and they come through the prefrontal cortex. So the beauty of ayahuasca is it helps that process because in epigenetics, there's a gene called the sigmar-1 gene that gets activated when you drink ayahuasca, and it's intention-based. So you have to have a goal, basically. And what happens is that neuron pathway starts to link up between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, and that's where you have this release. So all of these things are kind of working synergistically together. And that's why it's very important. Like we have breathwork sessions at Rhythmia too. We have three of them. And that's just as powerful as the ayahuasca sessions. Sometimes even more so, because the people feel really comfortable because they're at the helm of it completely, right? They're breathing and it's them. So they really feel safe with that. So we have 36 events per week. They're all about psychosomatic release, whether it's the cold plunge, the workshops, the ayahuasca, the breath work, the yoga, the meditation, you name it, the food even. We have a hydrocolonic cleanse that we do, which is really cool too. That releases emotion. So yeah, I'm a big fan of like that whole psychosomatic process.
What if the difference between a good coach and a world-class facilitator was your ability to regulate a nervous system in real time? At Sherpa Breath and Cold, we don't just teach breath work, we train you to read the body, guide the system, and lead people through real change. This program, many of you know I've founded Sherpa Breath and Cold. This program is where science meets embodiment, and it is on my heart to be able to share and teach the full framework, breathwork that shifts state on demand, cold exposure and contrast therapy for resilience and recovery, heat protocols that expand your capacity, that help you serve others, and the nervous system intelligence to know when and how to use each one. This is a context is king, safety is queen thing that we talk about a lot at Sherpa. Most trainings give you techniques. We build facilitators, practical, application, hands-on, people who can hold a room, people who can navigate stress, emotion, and resistance, and guide others safely through intensity without guessing. We are trauma-informed. We are somatically oriented. This is not theory. This is practice, feedback, real-time coaching. And you don't just leave with the tools. You leave with presence. You leave with language. You leave with the confidence to share breath work, cold, and contrast in a way people actually feel and can trust. And if you're ready to come along with me and my master trainers, we have an online version as well as an in-person weekends. They're all at sherpabreathandcold.com. So if you're ready to elevate your work, your impact, and the way you show up as a leader, please come join us. Become Sherpa certified. sherpabreathandcold.com. I would love to talk a little bit about the medicine in general, just to really get people an understanding of like where it comes from and how it's cultivated, and also your stance or the way that you navigate the conversation that is like, you know, deforestation and all the things that go along with the medicine, because it is coming, you know, from the earth and it's grown. Mm-hmm. So could you kind of branch into a little bit of that conversation? Because I know people will ask.
Yes. So ayahuasca is an indigenous blend of 2 plants that's into a little drink that people consume orally. And these plants grow in all over the South America, but mostly in the Amazon basin of Brazil, Colombia, Peru. And there's some of it that grows in Costa Rica too, like down in the rainforest down near Panama. So what happens is if you take the vine, which is the ayahuasca vine, and you reduce it and boil it and do a certain process, you extract something called a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. So an MAOI is very important in this process because MAOIs turn off the stomach enzymes temporarily, so you can absorb the active ingredient. Now, the other plant is a leaf-based plant that has a high content of DMT in it. Now, DMT is dimethyltryptamine, as we know. It's in our bodies already. Animals have DMT, plants do, humans do. And so what happens is you blend these two things together, the MAOI from the vine and the DMT from the leaf plant, and then you absorb the DMT into the body. And I call it priming the pump. So what that means is your own natural reservoirs of DMT and the way that that it should be flowing have been blocked from a life of poor environments. I grew up in Los Angeles, so breathing smog every day, pollution, negative ways of thinking, bad diet, you name it, all kinds of stuff that is blocked. Some people even say it's been calcified. It's no longer working for you. So what happens when you drink ayahuasca and you drink DMT, you get to recalibrate and prime those channels. And so then you have your own DMT flowing. And that's where you can connect with yourself first and others. So I believe that the DMT is a molecule that everything has in common that's living. And so that's the molecule that connects us to everything, to nature, to the universe, to other people, our family. It's this energetic vibe that's really cool. And that's where healing is. And that's where you don't feel alone in the world. And you can also understand yourself better. So this plant medicine, the one we use is, we use different ones, but the regional differences in plant medicine are based on that DMT plant. So the Peruvian Shipibo tradition has a certain DMT plant. The Colombian Yahe has a different DMT plant. So that's kind of the nuances, but they all have the vine in it. And the vine is super important and sacred to the
You will
tribes.
notice the difference, but depending on which vine style you're using or which tradition
Yes.
you're using, yeah.
100%. So we work with a tribe in Punta Mayo, Colombia, and they have a rotating sort of farming ability that doesn't just take land away from that area. And we also have ayahuasca that we're growing ourselves in a sustainable way. And we have specialists helping us, botanists and different people, tribal people helping us with this. And it's very important to be sustainable and not, because these plants take about 5 years to mature. And there's ones that we know that are, super old that are really, really amazing and spiritually deep. So nothing gets killed in the process. You kind of just take different parts of the vine, parts of the leaf-based plant. And so it's very important to make sure that it has high integrity when you're working with it.
Yeah. I know you're blending spiritual tradition and culture and shamanistic values in with sort of medical, clinical, and all of that. Do you feel like there's a place where people are like, oh, it's nice because there's like a cross section of this like intercultural learning and shared knowledge that's happening there for both the people who work there and then as a result, the people who come and experience it?
100%. On Wednesdays, we have a case conference meeting at 10 a.m. every week. And what that is, all the client-facing staff, so all the shaman team, all the medical team, all the people on property kind of managing the program, they're all in this meeting. And I run a clinical training. And also we go over every single guest, how they're doing. We put their picture up on the screen. How's this person? How's John Doe doing? Oh, they drank 2 cups last night. They're struggling. Or, oh, this person got their miracle. They're doing amazing. They had a breakthrough. And that's where the shamanic team gives their input. Like they're dealing with this spiritual stuff, whatever. And the medical team says, okay, he's dealing with, low levels of cortisol and we're trying to work on this and that. So there's a bridge that naturally occurs. I've learned a ton from the shaman team. They're very knowledgeable. So that's where that connection comes, because during the daytime, the guests are getting classes on the sort of the practical side of all this stuff, if there is such a thing. And then at night, they're getting the shamanic intervention. So there's a natural kind of back and forth vibe that we expose the people to that they really, really enjoy.
Cool. Yeah, that's a luxury. And I don't necessarily just mean like cost wise. I mean, it's a luxury to be able to have both of those things where like it's not even East meets West. It's like jungle meeting modern day. And then also taking the best of both worlds and really creating, just so nice to hear that you're doing that with the team as well, right? Creating cross learning between the teams. And then also, I imagine that there's some people there that have showed up with a very clinical scientific lens, and that there are moments that like the shamanistic viewpoint and the scientific lens, and that they're like learning so much from each other that it's like, are you watching some of the staff and people who work sort of, I don't want to say change, but expand in a way that they're like opening their mind to say, look, oh, how cool is it we can work in this like spiritual, energetic nature of ancestry and the demons and the whatever might be showing up alongside low cortisol, right? Or high cortisol or whatever else might be coming together.
100%. And we have a lot of people that come even as guests that are, directors of cardiology centers and famous hospitals and, in Boston. And so, and we have like tons of therapists, tons of doctorate level therapists, master's level therapists, a lot of MSWs, masters of social work, tons coming here. Also nurses. We have nurses every single week. And so all those people often are more science minded, more practical minded as far as schooling goes. And this is a mind blowing experience for them because they get to see there's this other part that they just didn't learn about. It's about a transpersonal psychology approach, meaning there's a Jungian sort of other spiritual component that we don't always understand. The shamanic team tends to understand a little bit better. And what's happening with when you mentioned earlier about like somebody might pick up on some person's energy or they might purge for a family member, it's not their own. What the shamans are doing during the ayahuasca session is, first of all, they're all drinking a little bit of the ayahuasca themselves. And then they're seeing and feeling the energy around the guest. And what they're doing is they're putting chants or Icaros, which are prayers and songs, and then they're using the traditional shamanic tools to kind of like create an energetic area around this person that when that trauma surfaces or when that negativity that they're trying to work on comes up, it gets released out into, I guess, the space or whatever, like out of the Maloka, out into the, the universe. And so sometimes those spiritual processes or that energy can kind of like ricochet around. And that's where the shaman team has to be very good at noticing that and getting it moved forward. Now, if my wife was drinking ayahuasca, which she has, and I was there with her, then, I'm definitely going to connect with something she's going through that maybe has nothing to do with me. And so that's also a natural process that can be very therapeutic and bonding for people.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. So I've been in these spaces with Icaros and music and things like that. Can you speak just a little bit about sort of how that setup lands in the Maloka, like where and how that's utilized? Because I don't know if every listener that's here is familiar with sort of the history of Icaros and where they come from and what their potency is.
So the first cup is around 6 p.m. of ayahuasca. Then we have a noble silence for about 2 hours. And people are just taught that they should just try to keep inside, because as you're letting the medicine sink in and kind of go where it needs to go. And then the second cup comes, and that's where the music starts. Then we have this really amazing live music, tons of great musicians that are playing these songs that are ayahuasca-based songs of lineage and tradition from these tribes that we work with. And that's where the shaman team, mostly the head shaman for the night, we'll start to do these Icaros, which are prayers and which are calling on spiritual assistance and also releasing spiritual stuff that's not serving the person anymore. And you'd mentioned that mostly there's 2 ayahuasca ceremonies out in the jungle. That's been my experience as well before arrhythmia. And the part that I learned about that is that the first ceremony is the bitterness and the second one is the sweetness. So the bitterness means that you're trying to get rid of all the emotional baggage and all the trauma you're holding. And then you get it out, and it's usually kind of hard. It's a difficult, sort of challenging ceremony. And then the second night is about filling yourself up with love and healing, and that's the one that everybody loves. So sometimes it's hard to convince people, like, hey, you got to go back to the second night because this is the best one. You're right. People get scared sometimes. So I think that in order for somebody to really get this whole process, they can understand both sides of it, the medical therapeutic side, but also this shamanic side that most people are not familiar with at all. So this is a great place to learn about it.
Yeah, and it just sounds like what a portal for people who are like curious and interested, but want to have a safe space and want to have some feeling of medical supervision and also something that feels like the dream that is the experience with this grandmother medicine, as we call it so lovingly. And sometimes grandmother like kind of beats you with a little bit of a rolling pin, and sometimes she just envelops you in love, but it's all for the best reasons. I would chat into the things that I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen so many more happenings or expansions from people. I'd love it if you would just, I don't know if there's like one specific anecdote or a story, of course, without using names or anything, that you really, where you were like, wow, the transformation from this was like almost mystical or magical or like unbelievable.
I got plenty of those stories, but one that really, one that really stands out to me was a military vet he was a medic, and he had been in the Iraq War, and he had bagged up a lot of different guys, and it was really, that's a rough position in the military. And so he came to Rhythmia to try to, get some peace and some closure. He had a lot of survivor guilt which is common. And his marriage was suffering. He was using alcohol and stuff to kind of cope. It's kind of a typical story of a lot of the vets with PTS. And so he came and he was very nervous because he felt like he might have to relive some of that stuff. Now, the good news is usually you don't have to, and especially if you've done a lot of work. Now, I think for you, you only need a little bit of medicine. My guess would be that's because aside from the biological side of just you probably being very healthy, also you have done a ton of work on yourself. You're a facilitator. So you also had to be, aware of you and heal a lot of your stuff. And so you don't need a lot of medicine. You don't need more and more and more ayahuasca. You need less and less and less over time because you're healing those things. And often people say it's a drug because it's a mind-altering substance. Well, it doesn't meet the criteria for a drug in the DSM. So again, people might have a different opinion, but you don't build a tolerance and you don't go into withdrawal once you build a tolerance. So for me, it's not a drug. It's a substance that you can use to help yourself. But anyway, this vet, he had a really rough night. I knew he would. And I came up there myself. I'm on call every night for these ceremonies. So is our medical director, who he's an MD. He lives on property. And I went up there and I became his dad, his sergeant, his friend, his brother, all in one night. And we would just walk around and he'd be talking to me like this. And he was healing all of the stuff he'd been holding on to. He would cry, he would yell. Sometimes he'd grab me kind of hard. I was like, this guy's the tough guy.
What you're describing is something that I've experienced where you're in a space working with people. And this is the magic of this medicine, if you want to call it magic, or this is the mystical ability of this medicine that I think is somewhat inexplicable. And is that you become, as a person who is a facilitator or in service of other people, people have said some of the most beautiful things to me. People have said some of the most scariest things I've ever heard in my life. And when they're speaking to me, the thing that I think is an important note, and I'm sure your team is like this as well, they're not speaking to Kristin Weitzel. I'm becoming someone else in their past history who knows their future self if time is a construct, wherever. I might be becoming an alien, I don't know, which is like why when I'm facilitating anything, I try not to overly speak because I don't want to interrupt whatever they are creating or crafting or the medicine is crafting in their story, in their mind, in the projections that they have. So I have 5 key phrases I always say, oh, I've heard that, or just things that are neutral enough, but the person knows that I'm participating with them. And then I've had some experiences, and I want to hear about this vet specifically too, but I've had some experiences where I've gone over and done something, and I can remember in one ceremony specifically where I felt I'm loving and kind, and I'm a person who does hugs and all of the things with consent and all of that, but I'm not, unless it's a child in the room, it's very rare that I would walk over to someone, lean over them and put my hand on their head in a way that you might with a 5-year-old child, oh, sweet thing or something. And there had been an instance where I just really was supporting a woman who's having kind of a tough time. And then I chose to step away and let her be in her process for, 45 minutes or something. And then at some moment I had this really strong call and I got up and I walked over and I put my hand on her head. And then the next morning she said to me, it's so amazing. I was waiting and calling this old woman, this older grandmother figure to come over to me. And when you finally, you came over, you were her, and it's just interesting because there's this interplay of energy of other people that are there, And
Big
so,
time.
I want you to continue the story, but I think that there are things that we don't fully grok and understand happening in the space energetically with, the neuroscience of it all, but also with our human connection.
Yeah, the way I explain that in a sort of a science way or a psychology way, again, it falls short to actually really explain it. But the way I explain it is my wife, I give this example a lot with my wife because it was wild. So my wife had abandonment issues as a child. She felt that her parents would leave her, which is not the reality of the time. She just probably saw a scary movie and whatever. So her parents were awesome. They never did any abandonment stuff. But as a little girl, she had that fear. And then she grew out of it, forgot about it, and wasn't an issue. She has a great relationship with her parents. She's in the ayahuasca ceremony and that fear surfaces. She can't remember what it's from. She has no context because nothing happened. It was just a thought back then. And so the prefrontal cortex wants to release this fear, but it doesn't know how to because it can't connect with what caused it. So what happens is my wife is terrified of spiders. We're in the wrong country for that, by the way. Costa Rica's got plenty of spiders. Most of them are harmless. But so what did my wife see in a visual thing in the Maloka was a lot of spiders. And that's where the fear was released. So it was a vehicle. So for these people that you became the woman, the old lady that needed to touch the patient's head, you became a vehicle to help the process of this emotional baggage. It's really powerful stuff. It's super cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. So you were saying that you were walking around and the vet was sort of morphing you into various different people in his life.
Yeah. And what's happening there is a process called moving from egosyntonic to ego-dystonic. And so egosyntonic means it's not a high functioning way to be. It's from you view the world from your own eyes and you don't understand that other people see things differently. You believe that everybody's kind of the same and experiencing things the same way, which is not going to work in a relationship or in a job or anything, because we all know that people have their own individuality. So what happens with ayahuasca in particular is you get to become your own sort of counselor or your own therapist. You step away from the behaviors you're having. So this guy, this vet, he stepped away from his own sort of process with the medic job, and he saw what was happening from like an outsider view. And that's where he could really understand it. And that's where his dad showed up and his brother did and some of his partners in the war. And all these different people started to show up because he was connecting with that energy that he had unresolved. And so the reason why ayahuasca works really well for personality disorders, primarily cluster B, which are the histrionic, borderline, narcissistic, and antisocial, those 4 personality disorders are considered not curable in the medicine world. But we've seen it be cured because of that process of egosyntonic moving to ego-dystonic. So it's amazing. Now, the ego-dystonic means you do understand there's different perspectives. People have a different view on life. And that happens when you step back and observe yourself in these situations. So that was what happened with the vet, because he got to really understand what was going on. He wasn't within his own shell, kind of being overwhelmed and scared. And I like to say that, most people aren't vets, right? They go do ayahuasca, but you're a veteran of your own life because of the trauma you've been through. So it's all relevant, the process that we explain.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if you could speak a bit to integration. I know that your center is so different, but I would say that in my experience and history, the biggest culprit of a lack of integration are some of the ayahuasca circles that exist in the world, or at least in like wherever everyone's going from Austin, Texas, or wherever. And I just want to speak to that because I think Paul Austin or someone who just talks about, if medicine makes you stand in the doorway, and then you just think like you can stand in the doorway every time and you're actually going to be able to like move through your life and step into the new realm of the next version of you. Like you can't just keep going to the medicine because you're just in the doorway. You have to do the integration to get through the door. And I know that your center does things in such a high, honorable way. And I wanted you to just speak about your viewpoint on integration and maybe how you navigate integration, post ceremony experience, post the week that people are there.
So I learned about integration early on in my career because working and running rehabs, drug and alcohol rehabs, I saw that if people didn't do aftercare or integration work, they were going to relapse almost every time. So I was big on integration on all therapeutic inpatient processes that people go through. So at Rhythmia, it was no different. We knew that once people clear out all this baggage that they're holding on to and they get new tools on how to handle their life and maybe be more assertive or have better boundaries or whatever it might be, they have to then start to apply these in their life. And it's new territory. People don't know how to do it. They feel uncomfortable with it. If they're empathic, they might feel that they're being rude to people by having a boundary. So there's all these different sort of challenges. And so we have a 13-week aftercare app called Our Life. Just get it on the App Store, and then they get a code. They plug in, and they get 13 modules of content that I'm teaching them stuff. Then they have breathwork sessions in there. They have mindfulness stuff and meditation, guided meditations. And then they have a group therapy every Tuesday. They can log in and be in a group with one of our facilitators. There's also one-on-one coaching available. And that's available whenever, not just the first 13 weeks. It's for any time. And they can go, and that whole thing's free, except for the one-on-one coaching that costs money because that's a little different. Extra, yeah. So we check in with guests periodically after they leave we follow up with them. If somebody tells us on the exit survey that they didn't get what they came for, they kind of fell short, then we check in with them that same week that they get home. Our success rate right now is about 98% in the last 6 months. So often we have 100%, a lot. So maybe one person doesn't quite get it, which is fine because, they come back later. And oftentimes they are on the right path now, so they know how to do it. And then we check in with the guests at 3 months, then at 6 months, and then later after that, because we want to collect data on how they're doing. At the 6-month mark, it's really interesting. 92% of the guests say that they're still in the zone, that they're still working on this stuff, and they feel amazing. So I believe that's because the ayahuasca, as I mentioned earlier, starts to prime the pump and helps you connect your own DMT. And it's a place that you're now familiar with. You can use it as a tool. We also refer people right back to their therapist if they still need to. Now, a lot of therapists that come to Rhythmia, they say, the reason I'm here is because all my clients, when they came back from Rhythmia or another place, fired me.
Which they should be happy about. There's plenty of people out there who need help. They're going to have a full roster no matter what, but should be happy that they're getting fired.
That's right. So they're like, what is going on down here? So they come and they go, oh, I get it now. And so those therapists, we start to refer to them for people because they do integration work. So integration is everything. If you don't have integration, it's like, don't even bother, in my opinion, doing the ceremonies because, you got to have integration. It's so important.
Yeah, I love that. I'd love for you to put on your facilitator hat or to speak specifically to facilitators who are listening to this, people who are in the coaching world around the space of any psychedelic, any plant medicine, any empathogen, entheogen molecule of this nature. And just speak about, like your view on sort of ethics and how you think people should be. I hate to should all over every facilitator, but just like maybe like the 3 things you think that a lot of facilitators are missing that would behoove them and sort of level them up to becoming more of like a top 10% facilitator if they incorporated it into their life.
Well, I think the main thing with clinicians is that they have a hard time believing that this can actually turn somebody around very quickly. Because the model they learned in school, and I learned it too, is that if someone has, let's say, an addiction, for example, they have to be in recovery their whole life or else they're going to relapse. So again, that might be true for some people, of course, but the healing that occurs so quickly can be a bit overwhelming for the guest. And so the therapist or the coach, the counselor, they have to be aware that they have to help the person sort of calm down a bit and then start to they have to learn techniques of kind of anti-anxiety stuff without meds and how to do sometimes tapping or different sort of physical connections with self to get that somatic part. Definitely. Somatic's very important. So I would say understanding that this is real. It does happen. We're collecting data on it. People are changing. 81% of our guests say that the depression they had prior is gone, or that the symptoms are greatly reduced and they don't go back to their SSRI meds because they had to come off SSRIs to drink, and they don't, 81% don't go back to them. So that's hard for the clinicians to actually wrap their head around because they think, oh, you're in the pink cloud, which means, you're just like, you're so happy, you're newly recovered or whatever you might feel, and you're just in this la la land of like not reality. And so that's valid for some things, but this is a new lifestyle that the people have to learn how to adapt to. So the clinician, I believe, again, it's not necessary, but I believe that they should participate in an ayahuasca session or in a plant medicine session or in a psychedelic session, LSD, MDMA, whatever, because the fields of psychology were originally with those plant medicines and those synthetic substances. So we know there's a way it can be abused, but there's a therapeutic way that is very helpful. So I think the brainwashing that occurs for clinicians in school, whether intentional or not, I think it's a little bit of both, especially from the pharmaceutical industry. I was taught I have to give somebody a diagnosis immediately or else I can't bill insurance. Now, it's unethical to diagnose somebody sooner than 18 months because I don't know what they have. This is going to take a lot of work to figure it out. But I had to session 1 give a diagnosis. So that sort of protocol has to change in the clinician's wheelhouse. So I think it's just a matter of like understanding what's actually going on. And the science is a way that they can kind of open the door and start to see, because there wasn't a lot of research before. There's much more research happening. Like I just gave a lecture in the Bahamas to a longevity conference. I do it every year. It's my 4th year. And in there's a lot of longevity medicine, stem cells, plasmids, all kinds of stuff that's amazing. And I'm the psychedelic guy. I get up there, I'm like, yeah, well, ayahuasca is a longevity medicine because it's helping you live longer because you're happier, and it heals a lot of stuff. It's great for autoimmune conditions. And so the therapists, the science-minded people, the clinicians, they can crack the door open a bit by looking at the science first and then going into this sort of esoteric part that's hard to wrap your head around. And they have to get out of this brainwashing vibe that they've, been in for probably decades.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you mentioned that. And I love that you mentioned sort of the somatic piece of it. I know that there are some states and different licensing where people who are working in the clinical space cannot put hands on clients in specific areas of the world, regions, whatever.
Yeah.
But one of the, just shout out to Will Reason runs a program called Trauma and Somatics, which is one of the, in the first year of facilitation, I was like, I need to get more of an understanding of not just being aware, but actually being, trauma informed and being able to work with people and their bodies. And thankfully in my early days, this is the arc of all of our stories, right? Is that the things you learned in the past are transferable skills for what you need in the future. And you're like, oh, that's why that happened to me. But
Exactly.
I did a lot of yoga teaching with hands-on adjusting and assisting and all the things that were, of course, with consent of students. But it gave me an understanding of the human body and how to put my hands on someone in a way that feels safe and then also feels supportive. And so all of that trauma and somatic work is that's, I think, a really big win for anyone who's either allowed to or is doing other work and wants to get a trauma-informed certification. It's super helpful in that space because so much of what we learn and you continue to share too is just about how the body is, it keeps score as it has been said over and over and over again, but it really understands and sends the signal from the environment to the mind. Here we are trying to think our way through everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
People show up in their head. And so we want to get them to drop into their heart and into their gut where their emotions lie. And that's the challenge. The challenge is just this little small distance from head to heart. And so once they do it, they feel like they have this superpower, because they can navigate their life in a really powerful way. All of our staff are trauma informed, all of them. And they've had the training because it's so important. There's a lot of vulnerable guests that come healing sexual abuse trauma, healing all kinds of stuff.
Perpetrators and things like that in their
Totally.
lives. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
We've heard almost every possible scenario, horrific stuff sometimes. We separate the men from the women in the Maloka. There's 2 different sides. We just find that to be better. It's more appropriate. It's also traditional.
Traditional, yeah.
So it's really good to have that. And there's a lot of people there to make sure that you feel safe in that space. So I do think that the trauma response that people are going through is super important because it's a parallel process. What people are experiencing inpatient with us is a theme what's going on in their life outside. And so it's a window into healing. If somebody feels like, oh, I'm not getting the help I need in the Maloka, I'm raising my hand and nobody's coming. That's a theme for them in their life outside. They feel invisible, unheard, no voice, and we can work with that. So everything that we do is connected to their own process.
My entire world is built around the nervous system, teaching people how to regulate it, to train it, to build resilience through breathwork, cold and heat therapy. So when I tell you that the Apollo Neuro is a tool I actually use and actually recommend, I need you to understand the weight of that. This is something that I've been wearing for 6 years. It's a wearable. My preference is to wear it on my ankle. You can wear it on your wrist or in a little clip on your collarbone. And they've done this incredible thing recently, which is update their app to include smart vibes. So whereas you used to have to set it and then change it and then turn it on and then turn it off again, now throughout the course of your day, the Apollo can just be running. I charge it when I'm in the shower. It has all these different frequencies that signal safety to your brain, that do different vibratory patterns for focus or for sleep or for really shifting the needle on your HRV, which is really kind of a cool byproduct if you're wearing this device on your body. Your autonomic nervous system responds, your fight or flight noise starts to quiet, and it's not magic. It's neuroscience. It's backed by 17 clinical studies. David Rabin, who's the founder, is just an incredible friend of mine. And what I love is it fills the gaps in a day. When you can't do a full breathwork practice, when you can't come down and take a breath between meetings, or regulate yourself, or get out into nature. If you're flying, if you're lying awake at night at 2 a.m., but you just can't stop the rumination in your brain, you just set on the sleep vibe. And what I also love is that if I get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom or I'm restless, it actually will turn back on to help me fall back asleep. You can really feel your system shift. I always say the goal is nervous system flexibility, the ability to move through states with intention. And Apollo is one of the few tools I've seen that actually help develop that. So try it for yourself. Check out apolloneuro.com, APOLLONEURO.com. Use the code WELLPOWER to save and see what it feels like to put your nervous system back in your own hands. Again, I'm loving this device, the Apollo. Check it out. Okay, I'm going to ask you, I don't want to come to a close, but we're going to have to. And I'm going to ask you this question on the outside of the bubble of all the things that we talked about, just specifically about you, Dr. Jeff. If you were to talk about one practice that you have every day, and it can be in the right now, and of course, I don't think it's drinking ayahuasca every day.
No, not every day, no.
But if you were to have one practice or talk about one practice that you think is really pivotal to optimizing your well-being and that keeps you either grounded, intact, or in your self-energy in a way that feels just healthy and in your aliveness, what would that one practice be that you'd suggest to listeners to bring into their life?
So a lot of us, including me, are empaths. And what that means is that I remove myself from a situation when I'm dealing with a client and I pull in their energy and hold it. That's allowing me to connect with the guest, also understand if I feel sad, I'm picking up on their sadness. So there's an alignment that I can do. Now, I need to redirect that energy back to that person in what's called a corrective emotional experience. And so if I'm unable to do that because it was a quick interaction, it was in passing, it wasn't a session sitting down with the guest. If I know that at the end of my day, I've got a lot of this emotional projection on me, it's just a fact working in the field. And so I have a practice of getting this off of me every day. And I go up to the gym. We have a gym up there with a sauna and cold plunge, all this stuff. And I run on the treadmill 5K every single evening because that's where I'm mindfully getting off this baggage that I'm holding for everybody else. If I go home and I haven't done that, my wife is funny. She says, "Are you going to join us anytime soon?" Because she knows I'm still unplugged from myself. I go, "Oh my gosh, you're right." So I might go hit a couple golf balls at the driving range before I get home to help do that if I missed the treadmill. So for me, a daily practice of getting off of me all this emotional projection is super important. And sometimes people that are empaths have learned they should block emotional projection. That's against their nature. I don't recommend that because you have to recognize the projection. So I'm able to, with practice over the years, being able to recognize this projection that I'm getting, and I use it as a tool. It's a therapeutic tool. So for me, the mindfulness release of this projection is key for myself every day.
Yeah. And will you mention what the phrase is that you used at the beginning of that point called?
So there's corrective emotional experience. Is that what you're talking to? Yeah.
Yeah.
So what that means is if somebody in their life was constantly shamed by their parents or their friends for being anxious, what are you always so worried about? There's nothing to worry about. And then the person never heals it and bottles it up. Then they're in a clinical setting and they project the anxiety. And I do not respond like that. I respond, "Wow, you got a lot of anxiety. Are you okay? How are you feeling? What's going on with that? Where does that come from?" And that's a corrected emotional experience because now they're getting it in a way from me that's healing. It's not the old way where it was shaming them. So that's what that is. And that goes back and forth. It's called the objective third. It's a Freudian model 3 protocol of object relations. So there's components that we're using with that in our practice here.
Amazing. I love to learn about all these tools and tactics. And I think it speaks, I love that you brought that up, saying that that's your practice, because I think that that's something, it speaks directly to me in many ways, because I feel that some of the best facilitators in the world are the biggest empaths. And then there's this notion of great, I've navigated that projection and we have had the corrective action, but then am I walking out the door still holding on to something that it sparked in me? Because once I leave the doorway and those thoughts are in my mind, and then I'm layering it on to transference to what has happened in my life, then it's I need to go through the process of unpacking it for myself. So I really, really appreciate you bringing that up, because it's always a good reminder. People will say to me, even if you finish at midnight, you go and I take off my socks and shoes and I go walk in grass somewhere, which isn't always sometimes you're like, I'm at the dog park, watch out. But like, even if I finish at midnight, I feel like there has to be some sort of, let's even call it a ritual that's going to help with that.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you sharing that. I think that's such a wonderful suggestion for both. Obviously, it's probably great for your wife. She's happy you're doing it, but also anyone who's listening, who's working with people in any sort of intense coaching facilitation setting. So beautiful.
Thank you. And I think it's something that creates burnout if you don't do it. MSWs, I mentioned them earlier in our discussion, Masters in Social Work, they last 3 to 5 years in the field and then they quit because they're all empaths. They're working with low income, underserved, domestic violence, foster care, inner city stuff. They're picking up and holding all this pain, and they're doing it all day long with a very high caseload. And so those clinicians don't have this training that it's often at the doctorate level about how to redirect in a corrective way. And so they just burn out. And it's really sad because all of us that are empathic have that same risk because we're holding for everybody around us. So it's important to learn to recognize it and redirect it. A lot of the workshops that I give are on that process specifically for clinicians.
So beautiful. I really want to just commend the work and everything you've done over the last, 10, 12 years just on this journey of yours. It's just it brings a level of relief to me as someone who watches and has seen these containers to know that you're holding it so dearly and with so much reverence towards this assimilation of like cross-culturalism and bringing shamanic flow in with science and all of this at Rhythmia. So I'm stoked. Tell everybody who's listening to the show who wants to jump on a plane or wherever, how they can find you and how they can get more connected with Rhythmia to explore more.
Cool. So we have all the social media stuff, platforms up, Facebook, Instagram, Rhythmia, RYTHMIA. And we also have, it's on the internet too, Rhythmia Life Advancement Center. There's an 800 number, and there's also a form you can fill out if you don't want to talk to somebody. They give you all the details if you call and how to prepare, what to do, the cost. Some people can't afford it, and we have a scholarship program. So you fill out a form, and then we say, whoever wants to come will eventually get here. We've given out $1 million in scholarships in the last year. So we really want people to be able to do this. And it's not ridiculously expensive, but some people just can't afford it, which is totally fair. And so we want them to be able to come. So Rhythmia Life Advancement Center and Instagram, the internet, and Facebook, and you can get a hold of us.
So beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing just your heart, your gifts, your talent, and everything you're doing there.
Thanks for having me. You're a great interviewer. It's easy to bring these things up, so thank you.
Yes, thank you for joining us here on Well Power. You can submit questions, learn more, shop incredible brands, and connect with me at wellpower.life or follow me on social at biohacking.breath.cold. From comfort to courage, friends, we're doing it. Any foul language you hear is not approved by my mother.